Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Content Patch for the 14th of December 2012. My name is TotalBiscuit, with around 20 minutes of gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, Level 5 will be fighting SEGA in its patent lawsuit, Cliff Bleszinski wishes to create new IP named Silver Streak, ArmA 3 release postponed, EA folds play for free into the Origin client, THQ Humble Bundle raises $5 million, and new Company of Heroes 2 trailer shows off multiplayer. SEGA of Japan's copyright frenzy continues. After the update that I gave you on the Shining Force DMCA debacle on YouTube, they have now filed a suit against the developer Level 5 and are accusing them of patent infringement. The patent in question has not been specifically outlined. However, they allege that Level 5 infringed on two patents, which outline controlling game characters on a touchscreen via a pen or finger. SEGA is suing the developer for 900 million yen, which is around $10 million, and the case has already begun. It would appear that the game in question that violated these patents was in fact a title called Inazuma 11, which is a football or soccer title and is a fairly popular franchise in Japan. Level 5 have issued a statement on the matter that says Inazuma 11 does not violate SEGA's patents. As a result of examining these discrepancies, we've concluded that there is no patent violation. While Inazuma 11 does not violate SEGA's patent, we do recognize that SEGA's lawsuit could restrict choices in gaming from here on out, as well as hindering the growth of the game industry. Level 5 was also quick to point out that this series began in August 2008, and that there are plenty of other Nintendo DS titles that use these kind of touch pen controls, yet only Inazuma 11 is currently being targeted. Now, what will happen, of course, if this patent infringement lawsuit is carried in the favor of SEGA, is that the Inazuma 11 series will no longer be allowed to be sold. Now, as to whether or not that's because it happens to clash with a game that SEGA publishes by the name of Football Manager, that's unknown, although it seems highly unlikely, I have to say. There is no official word in it one way or the other, and as far as I can tell, the comparison between the two games seems to merely be some kind of speculation by a couple of blogs and gaming news sites. Inazuma 11 itself is kind of like a football management RPG, and it's actually an anime as well. It's a full-on anime series. So it's a really odd case indeed, and honestly, I'm certainly hoping that Level 5 comes out with the win on this one, not only because I like Level 5 and I'm seriously disliking some of the actions that are coming out of SEGA Japan recently, but the point is that this kind of so-called patent trolling should not be happening in our industry and is directly damaging it, as far as I'm concerned. Here's the thing, right? Game mechanics and UI choices and things like that should not be patentable, period, as far as I'm concerned. The very notion is ridiculous. If you were able to patent game mechanics, if you were able to patent certain UI choices and things like that, then just think of the amount of games that wouldn't be able to be released or would cost a hell of a lot more because you'd have to go to the company and get a license for the patent. It's absolutely ridiculous. The way that gaming grows is by building upon things that have come before. It's a very, very iterative industry. It has to be. Once you find a good mechanic, once you find something that works, yes, you want to see it in future games. It's good for gamers to see it in future games. The worst scenario is that software patents become widespread and you can't end up using these useful features or these good design decisions, mechanics, UI choices, and all sorts of different things like that. I mean, the patent itself seems so unbelievably nondescript. Controlling characters with a touchscreen? I mean, come on, this has been around since the start of the DS. How is it even remotely possible that SEGA actually owns a patent for this? Obviously, this is in Japan, so I couldn't tell you what the differences are between US, UK, European, and of course Japanese patent law, but the notion that this is even possible worries me greatly. It really, really does, and I'm hoping that this case gets shut down very quickly indeed. The case is already ongoing. The opening arguments were heard on the 7th of December, so I ideally hope that SEGA Japan gets slapped about for this, because quite frankly, it seems to me that they're utilizing patents not to protect their IP, but actually to try and stamp on competition for whatever reason, and the increasing anti-competitive nature of SEGA Japan is really, really getting on my nerves. In an interview with XPlay, former Epic Games head honcho Cliff Bleszinski has described that he's working very slowly on a new IP by the name of Silverstreak, which is named after one of his favorite Transformers as a kid. He stated in this interview that he didn't want the chainsaw gun to be his legacy. Whenever someone puts together the top 50 weapons in video games, like the Halo Sword, the Lancer, and he finds that very flattering, but they forgot about all of the other things he's done, like Jazz Jackrabbit, Unreal Tournament, his work with Bulletstorm, Shadow Complex, and things like that. He's looking for something new to redefine his legacy. Now, bear in mind, of course, that Cliff Bleszinski left Epic Games in October and was looking to, quote, move on to the next stage of his career. So my hope is, of course, that we're going to see something very, very interesting coming out of him, hopefully going back to the roots of what Cliff Bleszinski was all about and what his design philosophy was able to create. And what was he able to create? A very large amount of very, very good games prior to going towards the whole Gears of War thing and really then doing very little else. So I would imagine a fairly massive departure from the legacy of late when it comes to Epic Games, although one has to wonder if he's going to be considering PC anytime soon. Of course, he is known for kind of crawling back to the PC platform with the upcoming game Fortnite after a few years ago stating that the PC was very much a dead platform, piracy was killing everything, and that it actually wasn't worth developing games for PC anymore. My hope is initially that we're going to see something a little bit lower budget, and maybe we might see a return to something like Jazz Jackrabbit. I don't really see why not. That would be a great downloadable game, and Jazz Jackrabbit was an awesome game. I remember playing that. It was great. Really, really good shooter action platformer, and we might see something like that, and taking the lessons learned with Shadow Complex, which is a game he was involved in. It's not a game that he personally made himself, but he was involved in the development of it. I would like to see something along those lines. I feel there's a lot of room there to maneuver, but there is something inside me that's also begging, and absolutely begging, for a new deathmatch game, something a little bit over the top. I would love to see Unreal Tournament crossed with the ridiculous nature of Bulletstorm in a multiplayer arena environment. That would be wonderful. So we'll see what comes of it. I think my biggest hope being that it's colorful and not brown. Forthcoming milsim from Bohemia Interactive, ArmA 3 has been postponed, and the plans to release will be finalized in 2013. The man with the plan, of course the guy with the name that's very easy to screw up, Joris Jan Vanteland, I believe that's correct, a 10-year veteran of Bohemia Interactive, has stated that they've been looking into the process of implementing changes that will help us innovate as a studio under unexpected circumstances, facing problems we simply could not have imagined. He's of course referring to a couple of the main developers being detained in Greece indefinitely, which has no doubt thrown a rather large spanner into the works. We're still trying to make sense of the situation and hope that our colleagues will be released soon. Although their plight has certainly affected us on a personal level, we continue to work on the tasks identified as key to the release of ArmA 3. The new launch window is sometime in 2013, and the studio also has another project in the form of course, the DayZ standalone release, which is coming at some point in the not-too-distant future. The studio has also stated that the additional development time will enable the project to reach its full potential, but we don't know exactly when it's coming out yet. Well, as far as I'm concerned, that's pretty good news, because Bohemia Interactive is not exactly known for releasing bug-free games. The additional time will hopefully make ArmA 3 very, very successful indeed. I'm hoping that the awareness that has been raised to the ArmA series as a direct result of DayZ will translate into more players for the ArmA series, because there's a lot of detail put into that, there's an awful lot of work put into it, it's mod-friendly, it's PC-specific, it's the kind of thing that we should be supporting to a greater or lesser extent. And this really has, it would seem, been the quarter for delays. A lot of games being pushed back, including, of course, BioShock Infinite, which I am equally glad has been delayed. A classic quote, of course, from Shigeru Miyamoto of the one and only Nintendo. A delayed game is eventually good, but a rushed game is forever bad. And of course, he made that quote before DLC and the patching culture came in, but he's pretty much right. I'd prefer to wait for the game. It's not like we don't have enough video games to play. I mean, come on. Having extra time is quite nice. The concern, of course, being that delays mean that release windows slip, which means that things tend to clash, and games that should have done well don't do well because they end up clashing with a bunch of other prominent titles. So there is a risk, certainly, in that regard. But here's hoping that ArmA 3 will turn out very well indeed, and certainly Bohemia Interactive do deserve success with that title. Let's also hope that the additional time is used properly and is not used to muck about and have the game released in a poor state. That's always the risk, isn't it, when it comes to delaying a title? You annoy people because you delayed the title, but then you raise the expectation saying, oh, it's going to be even more bug-free, it's going to be even better, it's got more features, it's going to be tighter. And then, of course, it comes out and doesn't end up being that, and then you have to ask them, well, what the hell happened with that time you were using in the first place? One has to wonder. EA has finally done the sensible thing and rolled its Play for Free brand directly into its Origin client. For some reason, for the past few years, Play for Free has actually been a completely separate brand with a completely separate website with games such as Battlefield Play for Free, Battlefield Heroes, Need for Speed World, and a few other titles. Now it's all getting integrated into Origin, which means all of the microtransaction stuff will work through the storefront, and you'll be able to access all of the games there without too much of a problem. It would appear to me that this has been a long time coming. I feel that if EA wants to compete with Steam in any way, shape, or form, they do need the convenience. And if they have a bunch of games that they've made yet are not available on Origin for whatever godforsaken reason that are PC specific, then someone made a boo-boo. There's no real question about that. Now, for those asking, well, what's the difference? Well, they have already had a section on Origin which kind of links to the games, but they have had this separate hub that deals with all of their Play for Free brand stuff. So it's good to see that they're gonna move things together. It just makes things a little bit more convenient. Personally, there's nothing in that brand that I'm really interested in trying right now. Battlefield Heroes is probably the strongest of the titles, but other stuff like Need for Speed World, Battlefield Play for Free, and all sorts of other things like that is not really as great. So it's not worth the effort for me to actually invest time in it, especially bearing in mind that these games have been out for years, so everyone's unlocked everything, and I don't really feel like jumping into them without any unlocks. That seems like a terrible idea overall. And honestly, when it comes to free-to-play, EA have not really done well. Battlefield Heroes is pretty popular, but everything else that they do really doesn't have a large customer base, even though they are built upon strong brands, and generally speaking, the titles they create are notably inferior to the other games in their lineup that are released at full price. Their unwillingness, as I actually mentioned yesterday with the Crysis 2 consideration, to release AAA games with free-to-play components is a little bit odd, to say the least. They don't seem to have a problem throwing microtransaction stores in everywhere, but to release a multiplayer game that is AAA quality as a free-to-play title, which many companies have been doing lately, is something that EA has, as of yet, completely and totally avoided doing. We'll see if this move over to Origin will actually encourage them to release better free-to-play games, since it's all consolidated, and hopefully it increases the player base on that. So I certainly don't see anything negative about this whole thing, and quite frankly, as long as it's not cluttering up my Origin client and consistently harassing me to play these games, then I don't really mind. The rather unprecedented THQ Humble Bundle has closed, raising a rather nifty $5 million. Total number of bundles purchased was 885,287, with an average price of $5.76. Of course, it sounds wonderful for THQ, but we should bear in mind that $5 million is kind of a drop in the ocean. And of course, it is not indicative at all of how much of this was actually given to charity, as opposed to being given to THQ. It seemed unlikely, of course, that THQ was doing so to save the company, as it were, but there are an awful lot of things that THQ has been doing over the past few months in order to try and raise awareness of the brand, as well as make some extra capital in order to make sure that they can keep up with their loan repayments. Of course, if they do not and they end up defaulting, then things could go horribly wrong very, very fast for the publisher. There's been a bit of controversy surrounding this. There's been two particular subjects. The first of which is, should Humble Bundle really be doing a bundle for a major publisher? Does that in fact go against the nature of the bundle, the ideals of the bundle? And of course, why was the average price so low for easily the best lineup of games we have ever seen? We're talking about $5 for an absurd, and I do mean an absurd amount of AAA titles. I mean, every game in that list is worth more than $5. I'd even go as far as to say probably the worst game in the list, that being Red Faction Armageddon, which I still enjoyed a great deal, is worth more than that. and yet we have an average purchase price of $5.76. Now, this can be attributed to a number of things. One, the fact that the bundle did not have a Linux or Mac version, which is also one of the primary complaints which links into the first problem. Is it compromising the principles of the Humble Bundle? Because the Humble Bundle has always been about Mac and Linux support where possible. As we can very clearly see, there was no effort to do that whatsoever this time around. So could that have done something about it? Well, it wouldn't really surprise me, actually, if they had Mac and Linux versions available, which of course they don't, so it's not like you can conjure those out of thin air. Then, yeah, the average purchase would have probably been higher, because across every single bundle, what we've seen is that average Mac purchases are slightly higher than PC, average Linux purchases are always higher than PC, sometimes double, even more than that on average for the actual Humble Bundle. Now, needless to say, the vast majority of the purchases happen to be PC in the first place, but that average is nicely bumped up there by the addition of Mac and Linux. So I'm honestly kind of disappointed in people, really, for paying that as an average. That's actually kind of terrible, although you have to bear in mind that that average is pulled down greatly by the jackasses that want to pay 1 cent for everything. So I guess that's probably got something to do with it, but one way or the other, this is an absolutely astonishing lineup of titles, some really, really good stuff, which demonstrates quite nicely how many good games THQ actually release, and the fact that they raised, in my opinion, so little from this is a little bit disappointing, particularly bearing in mind, of course, that a lot of that did end up going to either Child's Play or the American Red Cross. Definitely a victory for charity, but not perhaps for the publisher. I'd be interested to see what the Humble guys actually have in terms of information from the publisher and how happy they really were about it. The only info we really have at this point is, of course, from the president and from the CEO of THQ. The president, Jason Rubin, gave $11,000, and the CEO, Brian Farrell, paid $1,650 for the entire bundle. So they seem fairly happy with it, certainly, but I'm just intrigued to know what the post-mortem of this whole thing is. What effect has it had? And then more to the point, did it actually affect the Humble brand in a negative way? Because some people did say, this is breaching the standards. This is breaching the morals. This is throwing away the principles of Humble entirely because you don't have access to Mac and Linux. You aren't promoting indies. You're promoting a publisher which should be able to do just fine on its own. So what the hell gives here? Personally, I find it a very interesting experiment, and I'm one of those people that gets very, very annoyed very quickly when random people come along on the internet and brand a particular website, a particular commentator, or whatever, with this imaginary set of standards that they themselves created out of thin air. They have certain expectations, and that's fine, they can have expectations, but then to take those expectations and try and enforce them upon the organization in and of itself is just ridiculous. The idea being that you're supposed to be able to diversify out. You're supposed to be able to try different things and experiment. Some things won't work, some things will, but don't go on a rampage against these guys because your imaginary set of standards wasn't adhered to. I mean, hell, we get that on the channel all the time. This is not up to your usual standard. It's like, well, tell me why. I can't. Yeah, you can't, because you're talking out your ass. It's like, well, this is a nice little veil for I don't like what's going on, so I'm going to try and pretend this is constructive criticism. This happens all over the internet. It's very, very, very common. So I'm not really surprised to see it leveled at the Humble guys, but I don't really feel that they deserve to be berated for taking on a very unique and interesting offer. This probably will not happen again. If it does, then it's beneficial to consumers. I don't know if it's beneficial to THQ, although it certainly did raise awareness across the board. I have to wonder if just doing a really ridiculous Steam sale for a week would have actually done them better, but they did sell 885,000 units, and a lot of these were for titles that they have either new versions out of or are coming soon. Like, the original Darksiders is in there. That's promotion for Darksiders 2. The original Dawn of War is in there. That's promotion for Dawn of War 2 Retribution, which, of course, has been out for a while, but any future Dawn of War properties as well. Any future Saints Row games, Company of Heroes, Metro 2033, Last Light is on its way, so that's a nice little promotional bit for that as well, including the fact that those guys are actually giving away 2033 for free on their Facebook page right now. I would strongly suggest you go and get it before they decide against that silly idea. So, I don't know. It's hard to say. I would really, really like to hear in-depth from THQ as to what they think of the aftermath of the whole thing. I'm intrigued to see it. And personally, I don't blame Humble one little bit for jumping at this opportunity. It's not like this is all they're going to be doing from here on in. Absolutely not. In fact, I know for a fact that is not the only thing they'll be doing. And finally, a multiplayer trailer has now been released for the forthcoming THQ title, Company of Heroes 2, as developed by Relic, and it's looking a little bit nice. I mean, come on, you didn't expect me not to like it, really? I really like the Relic RTS, and as far as I'm concerned, Company of Heroes was a great game, with the exception, of course, that the Relic expansion syndrome came into play. They're really, really bad at expanding. They actually are. When they release expansion packs, they have a tendency of horrendously unbalancing things, which happened with Company of Heroes. In the case of the Panzer Elite, they were severely underpowered. It also happened, of course, with Dark Crusade, where the Necrons were horribly overpowered, and so on and so forth. The game will, of course, feature new factions such as the Russians and a very much integrated weather element whereby soldiers can actually die of exposure in the harsh wintry conditions. As always, we expect some very nice physics indeed and great combat across the board, and it's exciting to see a new RTS coming out. Not to mention the fact that it is not a free-to-play RTS, it is a straight-up, here's the box, buy it. However, there have been some concerns as regards to the fact that there will be a so-called premium currency and microtransactions built into the game. Quote from THQ Links over on the GameReplays.org forum stated that, "Relax you guys, it's not pay to win. Just because we're not ready to talk about multiplayer features does not mean we've made a World War II themed League of Legends. The stuff we're giving away with pre-orders are cosmetic tank skins. This sort of stuff does not impact the gameplay at all. I can confirm that none of the player boosts mentioned in the Steam tiered rewards program will provide any competitive advantage in player versus player combat." So we will see. It's certainly important to keep an eye on that, and I hope that they live up to their promise. The last thing you want is a competitive boxed RTS that allows for in-game advantages to be purchased. That is a horrible idea. Okay, folks, that is me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching this, the content patch, and I will see you next time.